It's been decades since Jim Morrison walked the earth, yet his name still echoes through music, culture, and the dark corners of fame. He was more than a rock star, he was a storm in human form. A poet in leather pants. A soul who burned too bright too fast. And yet, the truth about Jim Morrison was always clouded in mystery. People called him wild, rebellious, dangerous, a genius, a madman. But who was he really? Now, after years of silence, one woman who stood closest to him is finally ready to talk. At 86, Grace Slick, the voice of Jefferson Airplane, one of the greatest female rock singers of all time, has revealed the twisted, forgotten secrets about Jim Morrison that the world never knew. Secrets that change everything we thought we understood about the Lizard King. Grace Slick and Jim Morrison were never lovers, but they shared something far more intense than romance, a bond forged in chaos, creativity, and the raw honesty of their generation. Both were born rebels. Both didn't fit into neat little boxes. And both saw through the illusions of fame, even as it consumed them. They weren't close in the traditional sense, but when their paths crossed, something electric always happened. Something real. Grace has spent most of her life keeping those memories private. But time does something strange to people. It softens you in some ways, sharpens you in others. And now, in her late 80s, with most of the voices from that era gone, Grace feels a responsibility, not to gossip, but to tell the truth. Not for attention, but for history. Because she says we never really knew Jim Morrison. Not the way he truly was. People think of Jim as a man who lived on stage, who shouted poems into the void and drank until his demons danced. But Grace remembers a quieter side, a haunted side, a man who was deeply aware of his own downfall, even as he raced toward it. He wasn't always wild, Grace said in a recent interview. In fact, sometimes he was so quiet, it scared you. She remembers nights backstage, long after the crowds had roared and the smoke had cleared, when Jim would sit alone, scribbling poems on napkins. His eyes would be far away, as if he was already halfway gone. He talked about death like it was a friend, she said. Like he wasn't afraid of it. Like it was always waiting for him. Grace says one of the most twisted secrets about Morrison wasn't how he lived. It was how he knew how it would all end. He once told her, "I won't make it past 27. At the time, Grace thought he was being dramatic. After all, Jim was always quoting philosophers, throwing dark jokes around. But the way he said it stuck with her. And when he died at exactly 27 years old, found in a Paris bathtub far from the lights of Los Angeles, she realized it wasn't a joke. He knew. Grace also says Jim's public persona was partly a mask. Not a fake one, but a layer of armor. The sunglasses, the tight pants, the swagger. All of it was a way to protect something much more fragile underneath. People wanted him to be this god of chaos, she said. So he gave them what they wanted. But inside, he was breaking. One of the stories Grace never shared until now involved a night in San Francisco in the late 60s. Both Jefferson Airplane and The Doors were performing at a festival. The energy was wild. The crowds were massive. And everyone was high on something. Freedom, acid, adrenaline, you name it. After the show, the two bands ended up at the same after-party. Jim was already drunk, shouting poetry to the ceiling. People were laughing, clapping. But Grace says she saw something strange in his eyes, something hollow. She pulled him aside, out into the cold air, just to give him a break. And that's when he said it. "I can't turn it off," Jim whispered. "They want the freak, the prophet, the destroyer. But I just want to sleep." Grace didn't know what to say. What could you say to someone like that? It was the first time she realized that Jim Morrison wasn't just a prisoner of fame, he was a prisoner of the character he created. And there was no way out. She says that night stuck with her for years. Not because of what happened, but because of what it revealed. Jim was lost long before he died, she said. And nobody stopped to notice. Another twisted truth Grace revealed was Jim's complicated view of women. Publicly, he was seen as a sex symbol. Wild, seductive, dominant. But Grace says privately he was fascinated and even intimidated by strong women. He respected women who didn't play games, she said. He hated fake smiles. He wanted to be challenged. Grace said she and Jim never slept together because their relationship wasn't built on attraction. It was built on recognition. Two souls who saw the truth in each other and didn't flinch. She tells a story of one night when Jim tried to provoke her by saying something crude, testing her. Instead of reacting, Grace looked him dead in the eye and said, "Grow up." He burst out laughing. That was the real Jim, she said. The one who wanted someone to call him out, to remind him he was still human. She also says Jim felt deeply disconnected from his band. Not because he didn't love them, he did, but because he felt they didn't understand what he was trying to do. For Jim, music wasn't about selling records. It was about shaking people awake. He wanted to tear down illusions, Grace said. That was his mission, but the world kept rewarding the image, not the message, and it wore him down. Grace recalls a conversation they had just months before his death. Jim had grown a beard, moved to Paris, and was writing poetry again. He told her he felt like he had finally escaped the machine. But he also told her something that chilled her to the bone. "I'm not built for this world," he said. "It's too loud, too fake. I feel like I'm made of glass and everyone's throwing stones." That was the last time she heard his voice. When news of his death came, Grace wasn't surprised. She was heartbroken, but not shocked. It was like watching a candle burn from both ends, she said. You knew it would be beautiful. You also knew it wouldn't last. For years, she kept these memories to herself, partly out of respect, partly because they hurt too much. But now, as time moves on and myths turn into legends, Grace says the truth matters more than ever. Because behind every icon is a human being. A flawed, fragile, extraordinary human being. And Jim Morrison, for all his madness, was also a man crying out for meaning. Grace believes that Jim's greatest tragedy wasn't how he died, but how the world misunderstood him while he was alive. "We turned him into a symbol," she said. But he was more than that. He was a soul looking for light in the middle of the storm. She now keeps a few of his poems in a drawer. Not the famous ones. Not the lyrics. Just the scribbled fragments he gave her one night when no one else was looking. She reads them sometimes when the house is quiet. And she remembers the man behind the myth. The man who danced too close to the fire. The man who couldn't escape his own shadow. The man who, for a brief moment, held the world in his hands and let it slip through like sand. Grace Slick is 86 now. She's seen the rise and fall of rock and roll. She's outlived almost all of her peers. She's walked through fire and come out the other side. And she wants people to remember the truth. Not the headlines. Not the drama. But the hearts that beat behind the music. Because Jim Morrison wasn't a god. He was a man. Brilliant, broken, beautiful man. And now finally, his secrets are no longer buried. Thanks to Grace, the truth has a voice again. And that voice is yours to hear, if you're ready to listen.